session on business retention and expansion. Everything in the last few months has been business retention expansion. We don't even know who the survivors are yet, but our goal is to get there as quickly as possible and find out who they are. COVID has changed the landscape, and we are dealing with that as economic developers. Blane, Canada, and myself were involved in an early process to set up an COVID emergency response network. And my two colleagues on the panel this morning, Christi Bryant and Ron Brunch, have both been on that process and helped us get a feel for where we start as economic developers. So the panel today is three of us: myself, Eric Canada, Blane Canada Limited. You may know us because of Synchronist. You may know us because of our consulting work. You may know us just because we've been around. And we've been involved in business retention since the very beginning of my career, but more deeply involved from the mid-90s out to present day because of the Synchronous software that we developed and now make available to partners throughout the United States and Canada. So on the panel today, we have Christi Bryant. And Christine is the Vice President of Existing Industry and Regional Development for the Corpus Christi Regional Economic Development Corporation. She's also head of a regional group, a maxi-regional group called the Coastal Bend Business Resource Working Group. And this working group has come about because of COVID-19 and their collective effort to collaborate across a broader range of communities and counties in their South Texas region. And part of that process has been to develop best practices and share those best practices as this whole experience has evolved. So it's been a dramatic process. Christine also has a lot of background, unfortunately, in disaster recovery because of her work in both Joplin, Missouri, as well as Hurricane Harvey in Texas. So each of those has been obviously an educational experience. Now we add a new disaster to it, but in this case, it wasn't Christine and her community going through it alone. It's all of us going through the same process. We also have joining us on the panel, Ron Bunch, who is the President and CEO of the Bowling Green Area Chamber of Commerce. It is a 5-star accredited chamber, and that means it's in the top 1% of chambers in the United States, which is a pretty phenomenal collection. They have announced over $2.7 billion worth of new capital investment and over 7,000 jobs in the time that Ron has been there. Ron is a certified economic developer, as is Christine. So I'm the only uncertified economic developer on your panel today. But I have longitude. I've been here forever. So maybe that counts for something in this case. So joining me today, we have Christi Bryant and Ron Bunch, and we will begin the process now. So we will begin the slides. I'm going to do the setup portion of today's session. Again, because we've been through something that is different than where we had ever been before. So as we get the clicker ready here. So we've been through this process, which we, of course, never been through before. So we wanted to sort of set the stage and begin with a background. So if you can remember all the way back to February of this year, companies were thinking of themselves as the majority were growing, 68.8%. Some thought of themselves as mature, that would be 28.6%. And many companies had plans to expand, 42.8% in fact. This is based on national data from Synchronous users around the country. So this was the average response. Some communities obviously were higher in terms of plans to expand and others were lower. And many were having the recruiting problems that all of our organizations were trying to address and deal with. We put together, as I mentioned earlier, and Ron and Christine were both part of that process, we put together a national steering committee to create a tool to help economic developers document the facts and the impact of COVID-19 on the business community. And since that time, that started on March 14th. Before the week was out, we had over 350 people involved, and March 14th was a Friday. So over the weekend, the steering committee formed, and the process began to create a tool to help local economic developers figure out what the impact was, not only on the business, but also on the people side of the business. So that process has been an ongoing process. We developed a couple of instruments. What you're seeing is a picture of the dashboard, and this is some of the responses that we have. Other responses never made it to the dashboard because they were modifications of the tool that we as a group developed and shared. What we learned in that process, and this has changed, of course, a little bit because we have had intervening variables going on. We've had government intervention in a variety of ways, and varieties of levels of government have helped contribute to the issue of survivability. But survivability as measured by the executives of the companies reporting, and this is back in April, and it didn't change much in the full of April and into May, you can see that the very small companies had a very short runway. They were looking at maybe a month, maybe 2 months of survival. Obviously, some of them have made it beyond that. And as you get to the larger companies, you see the numbers really don't change that much. So as you're in the 10 to 50 category, 50% of those companies thought they could survive 2 months. And then you get to the very largest companies, and they didn't know either. They were thinking 50% of them. So no one knew what was going to happen from a business environment when you shut business off. It just has never happened before. So it was an absolutely new experience for everyone, and estimating the impact was obviously difficult. But what they did know is how many people they had already terminated or were in the process of terminating. So again, if you look starting at the top of the slide, if you look at those under 5 or 5 to 9, so the under 10, 29% of the layoffs occurred in that category. So less than 10 employees, you were encountering 29% of the layoffs. And the largest firms, the 100 plus, are at 25%, and the other 50 is scattered in the middle. The best group to be in was the 50 to 99. They had the fewest layoffs, at least at that time. Now what we're beginning to experience, because we're months into this issue, is we're beginning to see the executive layoffs, which didn't occur originally because those executives were able to work remotely in many cases. So many of them continued, but now we're seeing the business impacts, and those business impacts are translating into a higher rate of executive layoffs now. Add to this another hidden gem that we've been sort of ignoring as economic developers, and you've got the boomer issue. Boomers own 2/3 of the private sector companies in the United States. That's a huge number of companies in your community and my community. And only 3 out of 10 of them have a plan on how to transfer ownership to another generation or another set of owners. So it's obviously an issue that has impacted the decision-making process of companies that were in this COVID cycle as they look at revenue, the comeback of business, and their family's retirement plan, and their own personal wealth. So part of what happened, and this has been ongoing now, and this is data from PricewaterhouseCoopers from their Pulse survey over April, May, and June, and you can see that the planned investment curtailment, either deferring or canceling, has been going down. So it started out in April at 67%. Now it moved down in May to 58%, and finally to 52% in June. Obviously, we don't have numbers. It's going in the right direction, but it's still half the companies that had projects are deferred. So part of what we're living off of are those projects that were far enough along that they really couldn't be deferred. So we're continuing to see those and continuing to see those unfold. A lot of economic developers have hung their hat on this fact. 56% of the companies were looking for alternate sourcing options. For some, that translates into bringing companies back to the United States, which means attraction opportunities. That's what a lot of economic developers are thinking. The question is that going to be real? How substantive will that be? And when will that actually happen? Now, in the course of the daily counts on COVID, we're in the double peak area. We were hoping that this would go up and go down and we would get back to business. But now we're seeing that second peak develop. And as I went to a university campus yesterday and saw the kids commingling, not social distancing, not with masks, I'm suspecting it's going to be led by our university cities, in addition to those of you who have the major beaches. So the question now becomes survival. That was the first issue. And then which are the survivors we as economic developers are going to be working with? This is not a glorious picture. This is not an optimistic picture. Trying to be realistic here. The question is, when do things come back to where we can operate the way we used to operate? My estimate, unfortunately, is 48 months. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm seeing 48 months. The first 6 months is just about survival. Which companies are going to survive, and then we begin to see the survivors. But the survivors won't shake out until 2 years into the process. We're going to continue to lose at a slower pace, but we're going to continue to lose companies who aren't going to be able to survive. So the question for you as an economic developer, business attraction isn't going to come back substantially until the end of this period. Are you able and willing to get involved in business development, which means helping grow the companies that are still in your community? How do you help them increase sales, get involved in growing that business and growing their markets? Then, of course, community development. Most of our communities are going to be bankrupt, not in a literal sense, but very close to it. So they're not going to have a lot of money to put into infrastructure or community improvements unless they're absolutely essential. So that's going to be put off for at least 18 months. And then, of course, we're going to help see some of that coming back. So when does business attraction come back? Business attraction may come back 40 months, 42 months from now in a meaningful way, and may start that process. But really, again, I'm seeing it at 4 years or 48 months in this process that we're going to live through. So what does that mean for us as the economic developer? Well, we were in an environment where we were able to support organizations that were siloed. So our Main Street organization was focused on Main Street. Our primary sector business attraction groups were able to focus on just primary sector. And of course, our entrepreneurial organizations focused just on entrepreneurs. What I see going forward is, because of this mix-up that's happened because of COVID, is we're going to see a blend of those audiences within our organizations, and we're going to have to get more adept at working with both sides, the primary sector side, the Main Street side, and entrepreneurs all at the same time. Which means, of course, that we need more holistic, more integrated, and more internally focused organizations. Organizations like Ron's chamber that has the EDC as well as the Chamber of Commerce are in a better position to maintain and continue and go forward than those of you who are in organizations that are strictly attraction organizations. It's going to be very difficult to justify the investments that your partners and your businesses are going to have to make when their sales are way down. So how do we deal with the funding issues in economic development and the lack of money because, again, of the impact of COVID? Our organizations are going to be much more BRE-centric, again, for at least the next 36 months. Community development is going to be an issue, and attraction is going to come back, but it's going to be mostly reactive in the beginning and then turn to a more proactive. again, I hope I'm wrong. I'm hoping this timeline is not that long out. But the reality is we have to anticipate this. And if that's the case, then we need to be thinking about innovating and how we reimagine and realign the programs that we have so we maximize not only our impact, but the services and the demand for those services, which are why we're going to get paid going forward as organizations to be able to continue the work that we do. So it's a long and winding road ahead. I'm anxious to hear what both Ron and Christine have to share with us. So at this stage, we're going to switch over to Christine Bryant, who's going to share with us what's been happening in her part of South Texas. Christine, it's all yours.
Thank you, Eric, and hello, everybody. Hello, SEDC. I come to you from the Corpus Christi, Texas area and the coastal bend of Texas. So happy to be with you all today. I have to tell you, in all my years of business retention, that's all I've ever focused. And normally we're kind of the under the radar folks. We kind of work with that existing industry. But in times of disaster, our role becomes amplified because that's when truly all the work that we have done for the years in creating the relationships we have come to fruition. And to see what we can do to step up and help our communities. I've got to tell you, COVID is unlike any other disaster I've worked. I've worked with Joplin tornado in 2011, of course, Hurricane Harvey. But I've never worked a disaster that is still ongoing. When a tornado happens and it passes, the threat is over. When a hurricane happens and it passes, the threat is over. But COVID is real, and it's with us literally in the air we breathe every single day. So working a disaster while the disaster is still ongoing has been quite a challenge for all of us. I'm going to the slides now. And thank you, they've unmuted my clicker. So let me give you a little bit of backstory. We were planning here in the coastal bend of Texas a major opportunity zone summit called CBTX OZ20. We were working with the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council, and not only our organization, but all of the 7 counties within our Council of Governments that have opportunity zones. We're all working together to plan this major summit along with our higher educational institutions, our workforce partners. Everyone was working together on that. Talk about disruption. On March 12th, I got a phone call from the White House because White House staff was actually coming to our region to host the summit in April. And on March 12th, I got a phone call from the White House saying they would be unable to travel and that we were going to have to postpone the summit. So the disruption from that event led to a pivot. And you guys have probably heard pivot a lot. We pivoted that working group into working on COVID-19 business resources because we knew we were in for a tough time. And of course, on March 13th, President Trump declared the national disaster. And so we know that there were additional resources that would be coming on board with that. So I pull up this slide because on March 14th, on Saturday, I came into the office to message our existing industry on the emergency declaration and to get folks ready. I knew SBA would start offering some programs, so we wanted to make sure they were ready. So I pulled up Eric's actual email. I was sitting at my desk, and Eric Canada emails me, you can tell, at 9:56 on Saturday morning, saying he's putting together this working group to work on a series of surveys. And of course, I was in. I know Ron joined the group as well. So you see that CBTX OZ committee group, we then transformed into a COVID-19 business resources working group. I have to tell you that we had done a series of surveys, and I'm going to talk you through quickly what we have done, but I have to credit our wonderful friend here, Dr. Jim Lee, who's an economist with the Texas A&M Corpus Christi University here in Corpus Christi. He runs the South Texas Economic Development Center, and when Eric and the working group came up with the initial questions for the survey, I remember sitting at my desk thinking, I am not a theorist, I'm a practitioner, I work, I don't count numbers. And so I called Dr. Lee, and he graciously has provided the mechanism for us to be able to not only send links out to the survey, but all the data goes back to him, and he provides all of the analysis on these programs and has just been an excellent. So we're very appreciative to Dr. Lee that has provided this to us at no cost. So here's kind of the results of our first survey. And you can tell we did this March 23rd, pretty early on. We were about 2 weeks into our crisis. About that time, Governor Abbott in the state of Texas had already done some orders. So schools were closed, dine-in restaurants weren't happening anymore. You could do carry out. Large gatherings were reduced to less than 10 people. You had to kind of really quiet it down. So we knew early on we already had an impact. Understand that we keep our surveys open really fast. We open them on a Monday, we close them down on a Thursday. This one got about, I think, around 400 responses with our smaller group. And I want to take you through, you can see some of the results there. We already saw some reduced capacity. But one thing that was a concern of mine when we look at, as Eric was talking before, about how long can these businesses survive? How far can they go forward? So one of the things that I noticed pretty quickly on survey one that kind of made me pause is that little area that I have circled right there is how much of a slowdown can you survive before closing? And you can see on average it was about 12 weeks. But the median there, meaning we had 400 folks that responded to the survey, we had 200 companies that could only go 6 weeks or less. And that's just, they're just not going to make it. So we started looking for what kind of capital, how can we get them access to capital quickly? So shortly after that first survey, the Port of Corpus Christi, along with the City of Corpus Christi, created this amazing new loan program. It's a zero interest loan up to $25,000 for those sectors, those industry sectors that were truly hit hardest. That would be your bars, your restaurants, your salons, your gyms, all of those folks that were really shut down first. These were for folks that had less than $1.5 million in revenue. It's been a highly successful zero interest loan program that they created. They continue to refund that program. So they've done 3 different tranches of funding to it as well. Also in that first survey, we got some feedback from one of our landlords that says, we need a one-sheeter on all the business resources available, but we need it in multiple languages. So not only did we provide it in English, we provided it in Spanish, we provided it in Vietnamese and Chinese. We know that the landlord that requested this had some Vietnamese clients. And he says, I can tell you without question that one source, that document right there with the Vietnamese translation saved 2 businesses that he had. So we were really thrilled to hear that we had to think differently here and we had to provide resources. So here's our second survey. We did this around the April 13th marker right there. What we didn't know at the time, we would have thought we were really savvy, but we didn't know at the time this would be the height of our closure. We were under a stay-at-home order. So we had 900 responses to this survey. People kept, I think because it's the height of the closure and people were in the most amount of stress and pressure when it came to their business, so they were answering. You can see here that where they were operating at 80% capacity during the March survey, we're now at a 65% capacity. We were looking to see the 20%, 21% of business layoffs. All those workforce numbers were higher than our first survey. But interestingly, also, remember, so we looked at the finance, once again, the revenue losses, where they were at. And a Paycheck Protection Program had just come out. But one of the things I want to point out to you is one thing that I learned when I looked at the second survey. Remember on the first survey, that little red circle, that average, they had about, the median average was, the median rate was 6 weeks worth of capital to survive, had now gone to 12 weeks. And that average for the whole group is 20 weeks worth of capital. So that's a little bit better result. We were starting to see a little bit more runway, not knowing how far this was going to go. One of the things we did ask was how many folks had applied for the PPP loan. And so you can see the results there. What was amazing to us is we had 14% of our respondents had no idea that loan existed. Now, keep in mind, if we have 900 people that responded to the survey, we've got 100 some odd businesses out there that don't know this program is available. And what was fascinating to us is the same mechanism by which we sent that survey. We'd also been sending the same information about the PPP program. But I think it helped us in our mindset to help folks to realize that not everybody has time to really read through all these programs. And so we have to kind of figure out how we're communicating. Additionally, Dr. Lee broke this down by sector. This was something that we'd asked for as well, as who was getting hit the hardest. You can tell in the coastal bend area, our essential is oil and gas, never closed. That's going to keep going. But of course, our tourism, our arts and entertainment folks were hit very hard, and our retail sector was hit hard as well. So I don't think that comes as any surprise. Going to the next slide. Okay, so here's our third survey, and this is just, this is kind of the opening shot that Dr. Lee put in the assessment. You can see we have weekly and every 2-week phone calls continuing to this day of this working group, and that working group has continued to expand to additional communities. Right now, we're up to 10 counties that are working with us on this. So here we are. This is right in June. The state is starting to reopen. We thought this would be the open for business survey. It wasn't. We were just gradually reopening. And so you can see 92% are back open, but we had a mayor in a local city want to know about the protocols and how many were requiring masks, how many were requiring temperature checks and things like that. But the focus that we were doing in economic development is we started talking about supply chains, both domestic and foreign. We wanted to see, or international supply chains, we wanted to see where what did that look like? Were we having problems getting product here? We heard about it, so we asked specifically about that on this survey as well. Additionally, we've been hearing a lot of folks talk about employees not wanting to return to work because the unemployment benefit was too high. So we didn't ask specifically that question, but we did ask kind of why aren't employees returning to work? Is it because of childcare? Is it because they've been exposed to COVID or they're taking care of someone? We did have about 11% say they're not returning to work, which I think was a surprising number for us, considering we thought it would be a lot higher than that as well. Additionally, we did ask additional questions about what kind of financial assistance they received. I thought was really interesting in this, if you look at the government stimulus program results here at the bottom, that 27% of the employees on the folks that responded to the survey were retained due to these programs. So I think that was a great number. And you look at the actual revenue business change that they had is a drop of 27%. So I think it shows that providing access to capital through these federal programs really was very helpful to our companies during this. One of the things we started looking forward, because I feel like during this whole crisis, we have to think 5 steps ahead of where we are today, but we're still in unknown territory. Where are we going with all that? So we asked, where are you concerned? And you can see the concerns there. On the left-hand side, when you look at the outlook, you can't see, there's a very dark line at the very top of that. We had 2% of our respondents say they will never recover from this crisis. But other ones gave us kind of an estimate of how much. But keep in mind, we thought we'd be wide open by this time. And of course, we're still at 50% capacity for our restaurants. This is not a live shot, but I wanted to show you kind of the last page Dr. Lee put together. You see these tabs across the top. You can click on these and it will show you by sector how these are ranking. We started looking again, once again, we're looking at those supply chains. That's going to be a big focus on our 4th survey, which is coming up. We're actually launching our 4th economic impact survey next Monday. So I wanted to show you our regional approach. As you can see, our first surveys we did in March, these were the counties that were involved. Our second survey, they started expanding. We even saw a little bit of a hole of a county there that we wanted to pull in. And so here by our 3rd survey, the map is a little smaller, but you can see it really starts to take over our little coastal bend of Texas. You can see all the zip codes that are responding in addition to all the sectors that we have worked with on this. I think what's amazing about this is now that we're approaching our 4th survey, we are including other cities around the state of Texas. We've got communities around Dallas, community around San Antonio, and communities around Houston area that will be using our same survey mechanism. And all we do is send out a link to a survey. Everybody puts their narrative out there, but the link is all the same. It goes back to Dr. Lee at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and he kicks out results based on zip code. I wanted to give just some acknowledgement to the Coastal Bend Business Resources Working Group Collaborative. That's a long title for our group. You can see all of the entities involved in that. You can also see that we're working on our draft survey for launch next Monday. If you guys have any more questions about that, please let me know how you're doing and let me know what you think about what we're doing. These are my contact information. But it was just a pleasure. And Eric, thank you for the invitation. And SEDC, thank you for all you're doing. And I wanted to hand it over now to my colleague from Bowling Green, Kentucky, Ron Bunch. Thank you all.
Thanks, Christine. I really appreciate being on SEDC, and I'm very thankful to God for our profession. If there was ever a time for our profession to shine, it certainly is now. So thanks for everybody's willingness to share and to work together to do what's best for your particular community. And I really appreciate being on this panel today, and I look forward to questions at the end. Maybe a little bit about Bowling Green. Bowling Green is not a big city, but we're the 3rd largest city in Kentucky. You can probably see my shirt here with the Corvette logo. So if you haven't picked up your C8 Corvette yet, financial rates are really low. Just give us a call and we'll get you hooked up with that. But we're also a top 20 city in the United States for manufacturing. So in the last several years, our economy has actually grown from 14% manufacturing to 17% manufacturing. So that gives you more of a flavor of our area and the interactions, because one thing this has certainly highlighted is the interdependence of our economy. And so a little bit about our chamber, because every chamber, if you've learned one chamber, you've learned one chamber. We do have economic development and typical chamber operations. Those are our 2 operating divisions. We also run 5 other companies. So we have a public development company that develops industrial parks, a nonprofit development company. We have a training company that offers training to all of our businesses. We have a foundation. So we have a pretty wide array of different interactions. And in our organization, having done this for 26 years, I take on the lead role of our existing business retention and expansion. So in our community, we have probably 8,000 businesses overall. About 110 of those businesses we consider targeted businesses, and I'm their primary account holder. So our whole team works with our existing companies. And that's important because as was referenced a couple times here, in this environment, those relationships are critically important. And since I've been here a decade now, we've really developed relationships with our targeted businesses. And so in that, we also take a team approach, and this was highlighted as well too. Like many of you, we connect with the Small Business Development Center. We connect with our local manufacturing extension partnership. We connect with the U.S. Commercial Service. And so what we try to do is go in as sort of the point of the spear, the quarterback on the team, really understand what our businesses need and then deliver that. That allows them to focus on the market, which in this particular situation is really shifting, while we focus on the acronym soup, I like to call it, so that we make sure the resources they need are available at a place and time most convenient to them. And so we do that on the economic development side. On the chamber side, we take a similar bent in that our job is to help business grow. And so economic development has the 110 businesses that are targeted businesses. Chamber operations has the balance of businesses, so around 7,890 businesses, if you did the math there. And so they're too helping those companies grow. The difference there is obviously that they're helping them grow in the local market. And so this will become more important as sort of we talk through the questions that were asked. And I'll just go through them real quick to give you a sense of kind of where we're going. What happened during the early parts of COVID? How do we respond to that? What worked or didn't work in what we did? And that's a pretty common analysis for us. We're continuously improving, so we typically do that after we do things. How did it affect our organizational priorities? What's sort of our go forward strategy as we continue to evolve through this? And how have we found being more effective in our conversations with executives who are having to make decisions with limited information or, unfortunately, in some circumstances, misinformation? And so I'll sort of just walk through this real quick, and then certainly you all can ask questions when we get to that part of it. But when this started on the scene, early days of COVID, I got with my COO in our organization, and we really set aside to become essentially part of the emergency operations center for our area. So even though we're a chamber, at that point, we opened our doors to any and all businesses, not just in Bowling Green and Warren County, but our whole 10-county region. So we went from offering really services to targeted businesses and or members of ours, we call them partners, to opening up our whole suite of operations to all businesses. So early in the process, we were trying to get a handle on, how is this affecting our businesses? And so on the chamber side, we actually called 100% of our member businesses. And on the economic development side, we called, because we have those relationships, and had that conversation too. That was essential in really beginning to understand the questions they had and what they needed. And from there, we set up a recurring daily call initially. And so we had 2 calls every day that were available to any business in the region. It was a general call. And then we had just a call for targeted businesses, which in our instance was primarily manufacturers. And through that, we were able to both share best practices that were coming out. But more often than not, what we found ourselves doing was providing the trusted voice, providing the facts about the different things that were happening. And so those became very important. Shortly after that, because it was difficult to keep up with all the different calls and interactions, we really began to build a pretty robust web presence for all the COVID resources, the frequently asked questions. For those companies that got authorization from corporate to share their best practices, we exchanged those with others so that they could benefit. Because as you can imagine in your community too, every company wanted to continue to operate while keeping their employees safe, just like we as a chamber did. And so in this early stage, we operated as an essential business as part of the response network. So we never left our office. In fact, I'm talking to you from our office today. And so we've followed the guidelines and fortunately have navigated that pretty well thus far. Another thing we did early on, because we like to utilize data, as you saw earlier, we took some of the contracts that we had already signed, and we really began to repurpose some of the work we intended to do. And so we reconvened what we called our strategic council. So we got 2 leadership representatives from each of our 6 economic sectors, so manufacturing, construction, healthcare, etc. We got them back together along with our institutional leadership, and we set up another subcommittee to feed them. And that subcommittee was really to begin to look at the interdependence in an emerging data set, and we called that the Economic Foresight Group. So their mission was to get everybody on the same data set so that we as a community could be looking at a common framework of data to make decisions during the pandemic and as we emerge from the pandemic. And from an interdependence standpoint, unfortunately, we had this catalyst for getting together, but that committee will continue on after this COVID situation is long gone. And so that group has now formed up their data structure and recommendations, and our strategic council group is using that data to better inform their decisions. And our goal has always been to be the fastest growing economy in our area. And we've been very blessed that Bowling Green's been the fastest growing city in Kentucky since 2011. And we can only do that because of our businesses. And so by coming together like this, we now have a strategic council that's focused on really 2 things. By sector, what are the things we need to do to navigate the current situation? And then how do we begin to frame up what we're going to focus on the next 3 to 5 years? And you'll see how that became important here in a moment. We also repurposed our marketing dollars. We've contracted with a firm to update our marketing plan because, as you can imagine, the marketing communications during the pandemic is quite a bit different than we were all doing before the pandemic. And we certainly believe that'll continue on to the future. And so we wanted to give a voice to the decisions being made and to really talk about the pro-business environment we were still executing in our area as our companies are navigating this. We also, given the way decisions were being made, we reconvened our legislative group. In the past, they got together annually to develop a legislative priority mix. And in this case, we reconvened them and asked them, hey, if we, President, CEO, or COO, can solve some of these business issues, we will solve them immediately, communicate to the team. However, if we find ourselves where we need to advocate, because in this instance, you had either a decision coming down from an executive at the federal level or a decision coming down from our state executive, our only chance was to advocate for a different outcome. You weren't going to have legislation because the legislature wasn't in session. And so we got that group together to help us move on some of the issues that came up quickly in that. And then lastly, because we're focused on business, we recognize that we also need to focus on people. And so at that point, we reached out to the United Way and asked them to take on the same kind of approach that we took on, where they're opening their doors not just to the nonprofits and agencies that they fund, but strategically with those nonprofits that work with people to make sure people have the essential services they need so that we can both work in parallel on the same thing so that we can have people best navigate a very challenging situation as we have business best navigating that same challenging situation and agree to share data back and forth. And so that's sort of what we did in early COVID and that process. And, what we found early on really was what I would call just sort of the blocking and tackling of doing what business needs. I mean, they unfortunately had to lay people off. And oftentimes those people weren't getting their paycheck. And so we would help resolve issues like that because, the happiness of those team members, their ability to navigate life and to ultimately come back to work in good shape was important to our businesses. And so it became important to us, helping our businesses identify PPE and get the PPE they needed, and or some of them wanted to donate PPE. So helping to navigate and getting that to our healthcare providers and others. And so we've really played a pretty robust, like many of you, role as being really the center point in the business response and the business needs. And we're continuing in that role now. And that's some of the things that worked really well and some of the things that didn't work as well. The fact that we remained open and available and could be a trusted voice for people, that was absolutely crucial. I think I'm confident there's been really an evolved relationship that we have as a chamber and a chamber team with all of our businesses because we've been in the trenches with them much like you all have. And so that worked really well. our mission of really trying to grow business, and I know that sounds odd talking about that right now, but if you think through it, the fundamentals of a business plan are still in existence. How you get there may be different and the assistance you need to get there, but the more we can help every business identify the market and execute to that market, bring in revenue and stabilize and or grow is critically important. So we work to try to retain as many companies as humanly possible, like every one of you all did. Sticking to our fundamentals, that also worked rather than chasing 40 different things. There was some pressure early on for us to get into some of the direct to people services, and we've resisted that and instead set up a strategic relationship with United Way because it was important, but we didn't want to get off mission. So we stayed focused on our mission and the fundamentals there. And then with that consortium, we were already evolving our economic development model to get more into technology-based economic development and more small business development support. And so we were able to actually bring on 2 SBDC coaches where in the recent past we didn't have a regional SBDC presence. So we put the funding together to make that happen. And they've hit the ground running, and our statewide SBDC system's been awesome to work with. Some things that didn't work as well on the strategic council, all of our business leadership are so hyper focused on navigating the current situation. We really haven't had the level of engagement and input in the next 3 to 5 year part of our plan. We've got a good plan that we've framed up there, but it's been very difficult because, when you all know, when you come into work, much like our executives come into work, you don't know what you're facing really. And so getting that continued engagement, spending the time that we were able to spend when we first did this in 2016 hasn't really been there. It's been really great, but it just hasn't been to the level we wanted because people are, again, so hyper focused on the issue immediately in front of them. Outreach, even though we opened our doors, we found that we didn't have as modern a communication set as we really needed, and we didn't have the broader relationships in those companies where we didn't have a membership. And so really getting better at marketing automation so that we could automate communications, involving our strategic relationship with the media so that we can get the word out through the media, not just through the channels of relationships we have. And so some of that outreach and communication, we've really evolved during the pandemic, but that could have gone better, and we're evolving that. Probably many of you found this too with schools and everyone else not being in session. Having adequate broadband for everyone was a challenge for people working from home as well as childcare at home. And so broadband has become an issue that we're putting some focus on now. And then probably early in the situation when our executive at our state level is making decisions, we could have convened some business panels really to provide some business feedback in a proactive way versus a reactive way. So we've started doing some of that because you want to make sure that all the guidance that comes out is as effective as possible. And, because there wasn't business engagement, not everything that came from our state level really took into account the working environment in manufacturing in other businesses. And I think it was more just an oversight. And so we've begun to rectify that by creating some sector alliances so that we can have a broader discussion in each of the sectors and have more pointed input and future policy that comes down so that, again, we can balance safety and reopening of the economy. Organizational priorities was fourth question. For us, our core priorities really have not changed. How we do business has changed substantially. So tactically, a number of things changed. As you all know, probably your chamber in your area, if it's not you, they're known for the networking in person and getting people together and doing those things. And our business changed overnight drastically with respect to that. And so that had very significant revenue impacts for us. And so having our team really develop more of a small business consultant sort of mindset and approach has been important for us. And so we've evolved on that. As we look forward currently, we are focused on our technology-based economic development efforts. We are doing some supply chain work, as Eric had mentioned earlier. We're working with our manufacturer extension partnership who got some CARES Act funding to offer services to our manufacturers. And luckily for us, we'll actually be announcing some funding soon to expand our product offerings. And so we're adding 300 acres of industrial park property and building out the infrastructure to that, which will both lift up the economy and have more product as we have opportunities going forward. So those are some of the things we've done, and I hope that was helpful to you all, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Christine. I'd love to ask you a bunch of questions. We've had a few questions coming in, but you've got great stories. You've clearly proven leadership in very different environments in very different ways. And that's what we wanted to share, some of that approach that you've had. How it's going to unfold in the future, we'll just have to keep listening to your stories and see how you unfold them, because unfortunately we're out of time today. So on behalf of myself, Eric Canada, Christi, Bryant, and Ron Mudd, I would like to thank you for participating in our webinar on business retention expansion. It's a new tomorrow. We're going to figure out new ways of doing business retention. Ron touched on it. How do you reach all the rest of them? You've got your target groups, but that's only a small sample of the audience that we need to be relating to and communicating to and learning who they are. So well done, Christine. Well done, Ron. Thank you for sharing. Thank you, SEDC, for providing us a platform to share our experience and our thoughts. This information will be available to you as you wrap up the webinar and the conference this week. So thank you again very much, everyone. Good day.